The bullet should have killed him. I watched it punch through his chest, saw the dark bloom spread across his shirt, heard him gasp as his knees buckled. But Marcus Caine didn't fall the way dead men fall. He steadied himself against the saloon wall, fingers probing the wound that should have dropped him where he stood. Then he smiled, that damned smile I'd see in my nightmares for years to come. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as he straightened up, and the hole in his chest. It was already closing. I'd been tracking bounties for 17 years across 3 territories, brought in rustlers, killers, deserters who'd gutted their commanding officers. Never missed a target, never questioned a poster. But standing in that dust-choked street in Redemption Creek, watching a dead man reload his Colt, I understood why the reward was $10,000. They called him the Unkillable Man. I'd heard the stories in railroad towns and mining camps, whispers about a gunslinger who couldn't die, who'd been hanged in Tombstone and shot in Santa Fe, who walked away from a firing squad in Juarez. Campfire tales, I'd thought. Drunk talk. I wasn't laughing anymore. Marcus Caine tilted his head, studying me like a specimen in a jar, and raised his revolver. This time I knew he wouldn't miss. Welcome back, partners, to another tale from the untamed frontier. What you're about to hear isn't some dime novel fiction or exaggerated barroom yarn. This is the testimony of Jacob Pierce, the bounty hunter who learned that some legends breathe, bleed, and refuse to die. If you're ready to ride into the darkest corners of the Old West where death itself loses its grip, then hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a like if you're brave enough to face what lurks beyond the grave. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. Which city, which country? I want to know how far these frontier tales travel. Now settle in, because Jacob Pierce's story starts where most bounty hunts end, with a killing that wouldn't take. I found the wanted poster nailed to a cottonwood outside Fort Griffin, half covered by notices for horse thieves and claim jumpers. Most bounty hunters would have ridden past it. The parchment was yellow with age, edges curled and torn, like it had been hanging there since before the war. But that number stopped me cold. $10,000. I'd never seen a bounty that high, not even for the Dalton boys or Blackjack Ketchum. My hand trembled as I tore it down, and that's when I saw the date, 1867. 15 years old, and nobody had claimed it. The face staring back at me from the crude sketch was unremarkable. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, a thin scar cutting through one eyebrow. Marcus Caine, it read. Wanted for murder, robbery, assault on federal officers. The usual charges. But at the bottom, someone had scrawled in faded ink, "Cannot be killed by conventional means." I laughed at that. Drunk sheriff with a sense of humor, I figured. Every man bleeds when you put enough lead in him. I'd proven that truth 63 times across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona territory. Old Sam Bridger was shoeing a mare when I showed him the poster. He was the oldest man in Fort Griffin, claimed he'd been hunting bounties since before Texas was a state. His face went pale as milk when he recognized that sketch. "Put it back, Jacob," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Some rewards ain't worth claiming." His hammer struck the anvil with sharp, nervous rings. "That poster's been up for 15 years because everyone who's tried to bring Caine in has ended up in a pine box or disappeared entirely." I told him I didn't believe in ghosts or curses. Told him $10,000 would buy me that ranch I'd been dreaming about, with enough left over to never chase another bounty. Sam just shook his head and went back to his work, but I caught him glancing at me like he was measuring me for a coffin. The trail to find Caine started in the land office records. A man can't live without leaving traces. Property deeds, bank transactions, witness accounts. I spent 3 days in dusty archives, following a thread of violence that stretched across 2 decades. Murders in mining camps, robberies along stagecoach routes. Always the same description, always that scar through the eyebrow. What disturbed me wasn't the crimes. It was the dates. Marcus Caine had reportedly been killed in 1869 in a shootout in Abilene, hanged in 1873 after a trial in Dodge City, shot by Texas Rangers in 1878. Yet the murders continued year after year in his distinctive style. A single bullet to the heart, victims left with gold coins covering their eyes. By the fourth day, I had a destination. 3 separate sources placed Caine in Redemption Creek, a silver town clinging to life in the Arizona Badlands. I loaded my Winchester, checked my Colt Peacemaker, and rode out at dawn. Sam Bridger watched me go from his smithy door, and I swear I saw him cross himself like a Catholic. That should have been my first warning. Old Sam had never feared God or the devil in all his years. Redemption Creek looked like God had forgotten it halfway through creation. 24 buildings squatted in the desert heat, their wood bleached gray as bone. The silver mine had played out 5 years back, but enough stubborn souls remained. Prospectors chasing rumors of hidden veins, gamblers fleecing what little money changed hands, and the kind of people who had reasons to avoid larger towns. I rode in at high noon, when the sun turned the main street into a furnace. No children played in the dust, no dogs barked at my arrival. Just eyes watching from shadowed doorways and gaps between warped boards. The kind of watching that made your neck prickle and your hand drift toward your iron. The saloon was called the Hanged Man, which I took for poor taste until I saw the painting above the bar, a figure dangling from a gallows, but his eyes were open, staring at whoever looked up at him. The rope was painted in such detail you could count the fibers. Something about those painted eyes made my stomach turn. The bartender was a Mexican man with burn scars covering half his face. He poured me whiskey without asking, the bottle clinking against the glass rim. "You're looking for someone," he said. Not a question. I showed him the poster. His scarred hand stopped moving, whiskey spilling over the bar top. "Madre de Dios," he whispered. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Put that away before someone sees." But someone had already seen. The saloon doors swung open, and 3 men walked in with the swagger of hired guns. The leader had a deputy's star pinned to his vest, tarnished and crooked. He was young, maybe 25, with eyes that had seen too much too soon. "Bounty hunter," he said, spitting the words like they tasted bad. "We get your kind through here every few months. Looking for Marcus Caine, I'd wager." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what we do with bounty hunters in Redemption Creek?" I kept my hand steady on the bar, away from my gun. "I'm not looking for trouble, just information. Man matching Caine's description been through here, I move on. Simple as that." The lie came easy. I'd learned long ago that the truth got you killed in places like this. The deputy moved closer, and I could smell the fear sweat on him beneath the dust and tobacco. "Marcus Caine owns this town. Built it with silver money and blood. Half the people here work for him, and the other half are too scared to leave. You want my advice? Ride out before sundown, and maybe you'll live to see your next birthday." That's when I heard it. Slow, measured footsteps on the wooden sidewalk outside. Everyone in the saloon went still as death. The bartender crossed himself, lips moving in silent prayer. The deputy's hand trembled on his gun belt, but he didn't draw. Those footsteps stopped just outside the doors, and a shadow fell across the dusty floorboards. A voice like gravel in a tin cup said, "Let him stay, Tommy. I do enjoy meeting new people." The doors swung open, and Marcus Caine walked into the Hanged Man like he owned eternity itself. Marcus Caine looked exactly like the sketch on that 15-year-old poster. Not similar, exactly the same. Same dark hair without a thread of gray, same sharp features, same scar cutting through his left eyebrow. A man in his prime, maybe 35 years old. But if the dates were right, he should have been pushing 60. He wore a black coat despite the heat, tailored expensive, with silver buttons that caught the lamplight. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, free of the red dust that covered everything else in Redemption Creek. But it was his eyes that held me, dark as a mine shaft, old as mountains, containing something that made every instinct I had scream to run. "Jacob Pierce," he said, settling into a chair at my table without invitation. 17 years tracking bounties. 63 kills, all righteous according to the law. You're quite the legend yourself in certain circles." He smiled, showing teeth too white, too perfect. "Though I suppose legends are just stories until you meet them face to face." My hand itched for my Colt. but I kept it on the whiskey glass. You know my name. That gives you an advantage. I was buying time, studying him, looking for weakness. Every man had one. Every man could be brought down. I know more than your name, Jacob. I know you're chasing that $10,000 dream. A ranch outside Austin, 40 acres with a stream running through it. Enough cattle to make an honest living. You've been saving for 6 years, but bounty hunting doesn't pay like it used to. He leaned back, comfortable as a man in his own parlor. I also know you don't believe in curses or magic or anything you can't touch with your own 2 hands. The bartender set down a glass of red wine in front of Caine, unprompted. His scarred hands shook so badly the bottle rattled against the rim. Caine didn't acknowledge him, didn't break eye contact with me. Thank you, Miguel. Your sister's consumption is getting better, I trust. That medicine I sent from San Francisco? Yes, Senor Caine, Miguel whispered. She can breathe easier now. We are grateful. The words came out like a prayer and a confession combined. Miguel retreated behind the bar, and I understood then. This wasn't fear of a criminal. This was something deeper, darker. Obligation, debt, the kind of chains that don't need iron to bind. You help people, I said, fitting pieces together. Buy medicine, pay for funerals, keep this town alive when the silver ran out. Makes you a hero to them, makes you untouchable. It was a smart play. Build loyalty so thick that no lawman or bounty hunter could get close without the whole town rising against them. Caine sipped his wine, savoring it like communion. I do help people, Jacob, because I've learned something in my long years on this earth. Kindness is the strongest chain you can forge. These people don't fear me, they love me. They die for me. Some have. His smile faded. But you're not here to philosophize. You're here to collect a bounty. So let me make this interesting. He reached into his coat, and every gun in the saloon cleared leather. But Caine just pulled out a pocket watch, gold and ancient, with engravings that looked older than the Republic itself. Shoot me, Jacob Pierce. Right here, right now. If I die, you collect your reward and ride out. But if I don't... He spread his hands, that terrible smile returning. Well, then we'll discuss terms of your employment, because I could use a man of your talents. A true believer who still thinks the world makes sense. The watch ticked in the silence, counting down seconds to a choice that would damn me either way. Every eye in the hanged man fixed on me. The deputy and his men had their hands on their guns but hadn't drawn. They were waiting to see what their master wanted. Miguel had disappeared into the back room, probably to pray or hide or both. The only sounds were that pocket watch ticking and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. You're serious, I said, though I could see in those ancient eyes that he was. You're giving me permission to shoot you. It was insane. A trap. Had to be. Maybe his men would gun me down the second I reached for iron. Maybe this whole town was one elaborate setup to lure bounty hunters to their deaths. Caine set the watch on the table between us, still ticking. Completely serious, Jacob. One shot, center mass, your best work. I won't move, won't defend myself. These gentlemen behind you won't interfere. He raised his voice slightly. Isn't that right, Tommy? The deputy grunted agreement, though his face had gone white as chalk. I'd never killed a man who wasn't trying to kill me first. That was my line, the thing that let me sleep at night. But this wasn't murder. This was collecting a bounty on a wanted criminal. Self-defense didn't matter when the poster said dead or alive. I'd delivered plenty of men across their horses, wrapped in canvas, face down and bloating in the sun. My hand dropped to my Colt Peacemaker. The grip was worn smooth from years of use, comfortable as shaking an old friend's hand. I drew in one fluid motion. 17 years of practice made it faster than thought. The hammer clicked back. The barrel centered on Caine's chest, right over his heart. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just sat there sipping his wine like I was pointing a finger instead of 6 pounds of steel and powder. Whenever you're ready, Jacob. Though I should warn you, this is going to change everything you believe about the world. Some men never recover from that kind of revelation. I pulled the trigger. The Colt roared, smoke and flame erupting in the enclosed space. The bullet hit exactly where I'd aimed, a skill I'd honed on targets and men across a dozen territories. I'd put rounds through playing cards at 20 paces, shot guns from hands without touching flesh. This was point-blank range, no wind, no movement. A perfect kill shot. The impact slammed Caine back in his chair. Dark blood bloomed across his white shirt, spreading fast. His wine glass fell from his hand, red liquid mixing with redder blood on the floor. He gasped, eyes going wide, and for one glorious second I thought the legend was just campfire nonsense. Men died when you shot them in the heart. That was the law of nature. Then Caine laughed. It started as a wet, choking sound, but grew stronger. He pressed his hand to the wound, blood seeping between his fingers, and pushed himself upright. The chair scraped against the floor as he stood, steady as a man who'd just risen from a Sunday nap. "God, I'd forgotten how much that stings," he said, pulling his hand away to examine the hole in his chest. I watched. We all watched, as the bleeding slowed, stopped. The torn flesh began to knit itself together, edges pulling closed like invisible fingers were sewing him up from the inside. Within 30 seconds, there was only smooth skin beneath the blood-soaked fabric. Caine unbuttoned his shirt, showing me the proof. No wound, no scar, just skin that had never been broken. He picked up his pocket watch, checked the time, and smiled at me with something that might have been pity. "Welcome to the truth, Jacob Pierce. Now let's talk about what happens next." I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt through those saloon doors, mount my horse, and ride until Redemption Creek was a memory swallowed by desert dust. But my legs wouldn't move. My gun hand hung limp at my side, the Colt suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. I'd just watched a man heal from a killing shot in less time than it takes to say a prayer. Caine buttoned his ruined shirt, seemingly unbothered by the blood soaking through the fabric. He gestured to the chair across from him like we were old friends sharing whiskey instead of whatever hell-spawned thing we'd just become. "Sit down, Jacob. You look like you've seen a ghost, though I suppose, in a way, you have." My voice came out raw, broken. "What are you?" The question felt childish, inadequate. But what else could I ask? How are you alive? Why won't you die? Those seemed even more foolish now that I'd seen the impossible with my own eyes. "That depends on who's asking," Caine said, pouring himself more wine from Miguel's bottle. His hand was steady, no tremor of pain or shock. The priest in Santa Fe called me demon-touched before I showed him the error of his judgment. A Navajo medicine man said I'd stolen Death's shadow. A doctor in Philadelphia spent 3 months studying my blood and declared me a miracle of science. He sipped the wine, savoring it. The truth? I'm a man who made a choice a long time ago, and I've been living with the consequences ever since. Tommy the deputy finally found his voice. "Should we?" But Caine cut him off with a raised hand. "Leave us, Thomas. Take your boys to the general store. I believe Mrs. Henderson's supplies came in on yesterday's wagon. Make sure she gets them delivered." It wasn't a request. Tommy and his men filed out like schoolboys dismissed by a strict teacher, relief evident on their faces. Alone now, except for the shadows and silence, Caine leaned forward. "I'm going to tell you a story, Jacob. A true story, though you won't believe it until you've lived it yourself. In 1847, I was dying of consumption in a charity hospital in New Orleans. 23 years old, coughing blood into rags, knowing I had weeks at most. Then a woman visited me, old, dressed in clothes from another century, carrying a walking stick carved with symbols I didn't recognize. He paused, lost in memory, his eyes focused on something beyond the saloon walls. She offered me a choice: die young and forgotten, or live forever but never belong to one time or place. Never age, never sicken, never truly die. But the cost would be isolation, watching everyone I loved turn to dust while I remained. I was young, stupid, terrified of the dark. I said yes. I found my voice again, though it sounded like someone else speaking. "You expect me to believe some witch made you immortal?" This is insanity. There's got to be a rational explanation, some kind of armor under your shirt, a trick with pig's blood. But even as I spoke the words, I knew how hollow they sounded. I'd seen the wound, watched it close. Believe what you want, Jacob, but here's what matters now. You can't kill me, and that poster is worthless paper. You have two choices. Ride out of Redemption Creek and pretend tonight never happened. Go back to chasing rustlers and drunk ranch hands, living off scraps and dreaming about that ranch you'll never afford. He pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coin, and set it on the table. Or work for me. I need someone like you, a man who understands violence, who can track anyone, who still has enough conscience to question orders. I'll pay you more in 1 month than you'd make in 5 years of bounty hunting. The pouch sat between us like a serpent coiled and ready to strike. I could hear the coins inside, gold probably, enough to change my life. But I'd seen what Caine was, what he could do. Working for an unkillable man meant stepping into a world where the rules I'd lived by meant nothing, where death wasn't the end, and monsters wore tailored suits and smiled with perfect teeth. My hand reached for the pouch before my brain could stop it, and I knew in that moment that Marcus Caine had claimed another soul for his collection. Some chains don't need iron. Some prisons are built from gold and desperate dreams. I took that pouch. God help me, I took it and felt the weight of my damnation in my palm. Marcus Caine smiled like he'd won a wager with the devil himself, and maybe he had. That night changed everything I thought I knew about the world, about life, death, and the terrible spaces in between where men like Caine existed. For 3 years I rode with the Unkillable Man, and I saw things that would crack a preacher's faith like cheap glass. I learned that immortality breeds cruelty, that a man who cannot die forgets the value of life. I watched Caine build empires and burn them down for amusement. I became the right hand of a monster, all for gold coins and the promise of a ranch I'd never live to enjoy. The worst part? I got good at it, real good. They say every man has a breaking point, a line he won't cross even for all the gold in California. I found mine in a mining camp outside Tucson, watching Caine do something so terrible I can't speak of it even now without tasting bile. That's when I knew. Some prices are too high, even for dreams. I ran that night, took nothing but my horse and my shame. Marcus Caine let me go, said I'd be back when I got desperate enough, when the world ground me down to nothing. I'm still running, still looking over my shoulder, still seeing that wound close in my nightmares. And the terrible truth? Part of me wonders if he was right. So ends the testimony of Jacob Pierce, the bounty hunter who cornered the Unkillable Man and lived to regret it. If this tale sent shivers down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the darkest corners of the Old West. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know how far these frontier legends reach across the world. Remember, partners, some bounties aren't worth claiming and some men should never be found. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your conscience clear.